Have you ever found yourself reflecting on a conversation with a fellow philosopher, wondering if they were truly interested in engaging in deeper Stoic discourse? Today, I will ensure you never miss these subtle indications again. Here's the reality. Dedicated philosophy students differ from casual admirers when expressing intellectual interest. Society has conditioned many to be reserved about their philosophical passions, to hint rather than declare their desire for meaningful dialogue. They often communicate in subtle ways that most overlook. I will outline 7 unmistakable signs that someone genuinely wants to engage in profound Stoic discussion with you. These indicators aren't mere conjectures. They're based on years studying philosophical communities and intellectual dynamics. These patterns are observed repeatedly in academic settings and proven reliable. Pay close attention, as this might be the most valuable insight you'll receive about recognizing authentic philosophical curiosity. They reference your ideas frequently. Let's begin with the most fundamental signal: intellectual engagement. When someone is genuinely interested in your philosophical perspective, their mind naturally gravitates toward your ideas. It's pure intellectual resonance, hardwired into our cognitive processes. What to observe? First, they'll start with casual references to your earlier points, or perhaps correcting their understanding of your position. These references might seem casual but actually represent intellectual probing, testing the waters and gauging your response. If you engage positively, they'll deepen the references, perhaps citing specific elements of your argument or finding connections between your thoughts and established philosophical traditions. They might deliberately bring up your perspective in group discussions or find reasons to revisit concepts you've introduced. Consider this real-world example. If during a symposium discussion, they turn to address the group while building upon your earlier point about Epictetus's view on externals, and they subsequently develop that thread throughout the conversation, that's not coincidental. That's deliberate philosophical engagement. The psychology behind this fascinates me. Intellectual reference creates cognitive bonds. When they reference your ideas, they're not merely showing interest. They're literally creating an intellectual connection between your philosophical frameworks. How to respond? Don't dismiss or downplay these references. Maintain intellectual presence, sustain eye contact, and if you're interested, mirror their level of engagement. If they reference your perspective on Stoic indifference, you might later acknowledge their position on virtue ethics. Remember to escalate gradually, always maintaining appropriate scholarly distance until mutual philosophical interest is confirmed. They discuss philosophical dilemmas. The second significant indicator appears when they begin steering conversations toward philosophical quandaries. This isn't just about abstract theory. It's about personal, meaningful questions they wouldn't discuss with casual acquaintances. It typically begins innocuously. They might inquire about your interpretation of Marcus Aurelius or your perspective on modern applications of Stoicism. But notice the progression. If they begin asking about your specific epistemological commitments or sharing their own intellectual struggles with reconciling determinism and moral responsibility, they're doing more than making conversation. What's actually occurring? They're creating an intellectual sanctuary between you, establishing a space where vulnerable philosophical questioning can happen safely. By sharing private doubts and perspectives, they're establishing a cognitive connection that can lead to profound intellectual exchange. Consider this example. If they begin discussing their personal difficulty applying Stoic principles during professional setbacks or asking how you maintain equanimity during challenging circumstances, they're not merely gathering information for a research paper. The crucial element is their response to your philosophical positions. If they lean forward attentively, maintain thoughtful eye contact, and pose follow-up questions challenging your premises, they're not merely being courteous. They're actively constructing intellectual tension. How to engage effectively? Participate in the dialogue but avoid dogmatism. Demonstrate that you can address philosophical questions with both rigor and humility. Share your own intellectual journey thoughtfully, and always monitor their comfort with abstraction. If they're exploring deeper metaphysical questions, meet them at that depth but never exceed their level of philosophical vulnerability. They display scholarly attentiveness. Now let's examine nonverbal communication, the unspoken indicators of philosophical interest. When someone is intellectually drawn to your ideas, their body language reveals signals that their words might conceal. Watch for these key behaviors. They'll take notes during your exposition, not merely formal documentation but thoughtful, engaged recording of key concepts. They position themselves to face you directly during group discussions, which indicates intellectual trust and openness. They mirror your rhetorical patterns. If you pause reflectively, they likewise pause before responding. Most telling is their attentional pattern. They maintain focused engagement longer than social convention requires, then glance at the text you're discussing, then return to your explanation. This triangular attention pattern clearly indicates intellectual engagement. Picture this scenario. You're explaining Stoic cosmology, and they're not merely listening passively, they're fully engaged intellectually. Their posture is alert, they're annotating their copy of meditations, and their questions directly build upon your previous points. That's not mere courtesy, that's philosophical resonance. The psychology here is fundamental. These attentive behaviors are integrated into our scholarly traditions. They're often unconscious, which makes them more reliable indicators than prepared statements. Your response strategy. First, remain composed. Don't draw attention to these signals, as that might create self-consciousness. Instead, reciprocate appropriately. If they're facing you attentively, maintain similar engagement. If they're taking notes, pause occasionally to allow them time to record important concepts. Let the intellectual tension develop organically. They invite you to academic settings. Let's discuss one of the most evident signs that many still manage to overlook, when they invite you to join them in scholarly environments. I'm not merely referring to casual invitations to public lectures. Pay attention. When a fellow philosopher invites you to their private research group or study circle, they're not truly asking you to help organize bibliographical references. These are what academic circles call scholarly pretexts. They provide a professionally acceptable reason to engage intellectually. Consider this example. If they message you suggesting, "Would you be interested in reviewing my paper on Stoic ethics before I submit it?" Understand that university departments have formal review processes for that purpose. They're creating an opportunity for deeper philosophical exchange while maintaining academic decorum. The psychology here is fascinating. Philosophers are professionally conditioned to avoid appearing presumptuous. These scholarly pretexts allow them to express intellectual interest while protecting themselves from potential rejection. Key observation. Pay attention to the nature and context of these invitations. Requests to join small seminar discussions likely have greater intellectual significance than invitations to large departmental gatherings. And if they mention that the discussion will focus specifically on topics where you've demonstrated expertise, that information is deliberately provided. They prepare thoroughly for discussions with you. Now let's examine intellectual preparation, specifically when they begin researching differently in anticipation of philosophical exchanges with you. The key isn't simply looking for extensive citation. Look for changes in their typical scholarly approach when they know they'll be engaging with you. If someone who usually references contemporary commentaries suddenly incorporates primary Stoic texts, or if they've clearly spent time investigating questions you raised previously, that's a meaningful signal. Consider this reality. Philosophers don't dedicate precious research time to preparing for discussions with people whose intellectual perspectives they find uninteresting. If they're demonstrably investing additional scholarly effort when they know they'll encounter you, they're attempting to create meaningful philosophical dialogue. The psychology is primal. It's about displaying intellectual competence and creating conditions for substantive exchange with a potential thought partner. But there's a contemporary dimension. It's also about establishing themselves as someone worthy of sustained philosophical conversation. Important observation. If you notice they've read articles you've mentioned in passing, or they've researched questions that arose during your previous discussions, they're not updating their literature review, they're cultivating intellectual common ground. They reference specific passages during dialogue. This may be the most subtle yet powerful sign. when they direct attention to specific textual evidence. This isn't about vague references to philosophical schools you see in introductory courses. It's more nuanced. Observe these behaviors, carefully directing you to examine particular passages while maintaining eye contact, highlighting specific linguistic choices in primary texts while discussing their implications, or taking extra time with certain translations while in conversation with you. These aren't random scholarly habits. They're intentional signals of intellectual engagement. Here's what's actually happening. Primary texts are the foundation of philosophical discourse, and drawing attention to specific passages is a sophisticated way of suggesting interpretive intimacy. When they engage with textual details while interacting with you, they're subconsciously establishing scholarly connection. Professional insight. If they regularly do this while also maintaining strong intellectual presence, that's not coincidental. They're creating philosophical connection without explicitly stating their interest. The key is noticing if these behaviors increase when they're speaking specifically with you compared to others in departmental settings. That's your confirmation that this represents special intellectual attention. They create future scenarios for philosophical exchange. Let's examine one of the most powerful indicators that often goes unrecognized. When they begin suggesting future opportunities for intellectual exchange. I'm not suggesting they're planning an entire research career around your philosophical partnership after one seminar. Look for these patterns. They begin creating scenarios where philosophical discourse could naturally develop. My research group is exploring Epictetan psychology next month. Or, the library has acquired some fascinating Stoic manuscripts worth examining. They're not merely sharing random academic information. They're constructing frameworks for future intellectual engagement. The psychology here is revealing. Philosophers typically don't invest emotional and intellectual energy in scholars they view as merely casual acquaintances. When they mentally include you in their future scholarly activities, even subtly, they're already imagining more substantive philosophical exchanges. Consider this example. If they say, "You'll find the visiting lecturer's perspective on Stoic physics fascinating," notice the certainty in their language. Not, "Would you be interested," but, "You'll find." That represents intellectual investment. Key differences between collegial communication and genuine philosophical interest. They suggest focused rather than general academic activities. Their scenarios often involve specialized settings. They emphasize substantive rather than perfunctory exchanges. They provide specific details involving particular texts or questions relevant to your interests. How to respond. Don't presume too much or begin planning collaborative publications immediately. Instead, mirror their level of intellectual investment. If they suggest future philosophical exchanges, respond positively but maintain appropriate scholarly boundaries. Remember, when someone invests intellectual energy in creating future scenarios for philosophical exchange with you, especially around specialized topics, they're not merely being professionally courteous. They're orchestrating opportunities for meaningful dialogue while maintaining academic propriety. That's the essence of philosophical community. If you found these insights valuable, consider sharing your experiences with recognizing these signals. Let's learn from each other's philosophical journeys. Next week, we'll examine 7 signs someone is engaging with Stoic philosophy disingenuously. Until then, remain attentive to these indicators, maintain intellectual confidence, and remember, the signs of genuine philosophical interest are apparent when you know what to observe.